All right, class, so listen up. If you guys were here when I talked about YCS Orlando, then you would know that both Malice and Ryzeal are the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Hands down, with us also bordering a Tier 0 format. But one of the biggest things that we didn't cover in last week's lecture is that there are some other really powerful Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategies that round off the top 5 of the meta. In today's video, not only will I be talking about what are the best 5 Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks this format, I'll also be even explaining to you why they are so strong, so expect an exam at the end of the video. Big dog, like I'm gonna say to my future students, I am here to prepare you to be the best that you can be. So let's go ahead and jump on in. I'm taking this teacher's spiel a little too far, am I? I know you like it though. What's going on with ya, big dog? And it is an amazing day for Yu-Gi-Oh! I hope that your day, phenomenal. But if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. If you're new to the class, hi everybody, I'm TheCaliEffect, and if you don't know what time it is, then prepare to know that it is Update Monday! A particular part of the video where I scam you into thinking that this was a Yu-Gi-Oh! Video only to make you a better person overall. Don't worry, if you just want to hear about Yu-Gi-Oh! And want to skip Update Monday, then I've left timestamps, but you're really missing out. So for today's Update Monday, and I think for the rest of this month, I'm actually going to be talking about Black History Month. Growing up, it's one of the things that often got glossed over unless they were talking about Martin Luther King. It really did get spoken a lot. But I think it's incredibly important to know history regardless of what ethnicity it is, because Black history has a lot to do with you. Yes, you, even you. For today's Black History lesson, I want to talk to you guys about one of my favorite people that isn't Black, ironically named John Brown. Now, if John Brown was modern day, you guys would say he got that dog in him. Because despite what the government said, despite what society thought, he went around freeing enslaved people as a white man. This man was so goated when slavery ended and the enslaved were allowed to have their last name, a lot of them picked Brown. And that just goes to show the importance about how other people from other cultures can make a huge impact despite it not being their problem necessarily. My students, just because someone was white back then doesn't mean that they were a slave owner or racist. There are tons of other ethnicities that stood beside us in our time of need, just like how we should stand beside others when they need our help. But that's what leads us to the first part of the lecture, the deck that doesn't need any help. Ryzeal is easily the strongest deck in the game, and it's simply because it lacks restrictions, at least in the areas that it counts, and it plays supplemental engines to make it incredibly difficult to hand trap. Ryzeal Mitsurugi is the real deal, giving the strategy a boss monster in Ami no Mirakumo no Mitsurugi, a card that can destroy all cards on your opponent's side of the field and force them to discard when they activate monster effects. And players are still on Ryzeal Fiendsmith because not only can they make DDD Wave King Caesar to prevent themselves from being Nibiru'd, they also have access to Fiendsmith Desiree. It's going to be the closest we're going to get in the TCG to cards like Baron de Flor and Borreload Savage Dragon. I wholeheartedly agree with the students in the comment section saying that Ryzeal by itself isn't really ridiculous to deal with. It's when you combine Ryzeal with those other engines, that's what makes the strategy a real problem. And to combat this, players are playing Malice, which is the second strongest deck in the room. When we start the beginning of this February format, I want you guys to think of Ryzeal and Malice being like Spellbook and Dragon Rulers, like how Teledad and Lightsworn was. Yes, there is a de facto tier 1 Yu-Gi-Oh deck, but Malice is more or less built to be able to beat Ryzeal. The Malice deck often plays bestial monsters because not only does it further Malice monsters to be banished, it also allows them to be able to stop the Mitsurugi and the Fiendsmith cards. Malice has even went back to playing Dimension Shifter inside of the main deck to help stave off the other strategies in the meta, but now it's effective against Ryzeal since it is playing graveyard reliant cards. But one of the scariest developments about Malice that you're going to need to watch out for is the Nightmare Griffin lock. Nightmare Griffin is one of the most powerful cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And probably should have been banned a long time ago. One thing that I've noticed players have been testing out is that they've been using Foolish Burial Goods to send Black Goat Laughs. It allows them to be able to address Ryzeal Detonator and stuff like that, but if they're going first, they can use Foolish Burial Goods to send cards like Anti-Spell Fragrance, and Nightmare Griffin can set it back to the side of the field. They then follow up by link summoning into Abeo Aku the Lightless Shadow, which allows them to be able to special summon Nightmare Griffin in the main monster zone. This is the closest that we've been getting to skill drain with extra steps, and it's especially dangerous considering that Nightmare Griffin is a light fiend monster, so some strategies have been incorporating Fiendsmiths themselves. That's right, class, the de facto best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are pretty scary and they're nasty. But fortunately enough, I went through weeks, and I mean weeks of tournament gameplay, studying to give you guys a syllabus on the other strategies that are really good and why they are really good. Of course, big dog, if you want to see personal deck lists of these Yu-Gi-Oh strategies, I got them on my Patreon as a special thank you for helping me pay my editors. Now, it low-key is speculation, but a lot of people are figuring that Blue Eyes might be the third best deck in the room. Now, we talked about a budget version of Blue Eyes in last week's lecture, and to gloss over a couple of things that it has over Yugioh is that Blue Eyes Jet Dragon activates in the damage step, meaning that Yugioh Detonator can't respond to it, and Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon can actually check graveyarded effects of cards like Fiendsmith Engraver or Myriololic Aggregator. But where the non-budget version of Blue Eyes separates itself from the budget version is the expensive cards that you can play. The Bestial monsters are in full range for this strategy. This gives you better counters to Fiendsmith and Engines, and Blue Eyes can play up to a whopping 21 hand traps and still be ridiculously consistent. In fact, Sage with the Eyes of Blue can search Effect Veiler, which is pretty powerful considering that it is a free effect negation. One of the biggest problems about hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh is that if you do stop your opponent's combo, you normally don't have resources to follow up. This strategy, being able to combo and potentially search more hand traps as a part of the combo, is really important. And another thing that I do want to point out about the more expensive version than the budget version is the Primite engine. It gives the deck extra resources like Primite Joe Bream, and also every single turn allows the strategy to continue to play. And Dominus Purge is another expensive Yu-Gi-Oh card that's crazy strong in Blue Eyes. Because the deck is almost exclusively light, Dominus Purge is that 4th, 5th, and 6th Ash Blossom that you can play in tandem with your other hand traps to stop your opponent from doing what they want to do. Now, the more I play Blue Eyes, the more I'm confident someone's going to use the Fiendsmith engine alongside of Primite and Blue Eyes itself. The restrictions of the deck are almost nil, and the Primite engine insulates you from being Nibiru'd. So now that we've established a big three, the best 3 decks in the game, the next 2 decks that round out the top 5 have to fit certain requirements. They need to have some built-in counters for Yugioh and its mini engines, but they also need to be able to compare against Malice in the Nightmare Griffin lock. Thirdly, Blue Eyes is a little bit of a wild card, but they need to also be able to play counters towards Bestial while staving off some of the other strong strategies in the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. Statistically, the last strongest deck is Mermail, and it's kind of welcome. Mermail does a few things in the meta that other strategies don't. It's one of the very few strategies that does have that put on the floor like card in Totally Awesome. Totally Awesome is almost a bannable Yu-Gi-Oh card, considering that not only can you negate and take your opponent's card, it also gets you water monsters back into your hand to be able to restart your combo. Mermail is also really good at going against hand traps. The deck reminds me of old school Dragon Link, whereas if you don't get rid of the monster, it's often used for other things or has already gotten its full value by the time it hits the field and activated its effect. The deck also keeps players on its toes, where if you don't play enough hand traps, Mullen Glacier is one of the most unfair cards in the game, ripping cards out of your opponent's hand, which is no longer a drawback because they exceed summon with it, but the deck does have all the tools to go second. I think what really helped put this deck together is Presidra Storming of the Atlantean. Its effect to be able to return cards on the field by sending cards like Atlantean Heavy Infantry, combined with players not having access to Omni Negations, is what makes this deck so crazy. Mermail even has the tops to back it up. It got 2 at YCS Orlando, and throughout the weekends, it's been topping at a consistent rate. So don't just believe me when I say that Mermail is one of the top 5 decks in the game, believe the stats. It's simply a deck that has adapted and overcame through all of the interruptions that your opponent can throw at you. It can always have a way to make a board or even break the board that it's going against. Oh, also one more thing, there's Abyss Dweller, the card that should be banned. I understand that it's equally as good against Mermail, but Mermail does Abyss Dweller way better. Let's face it, we often use Abyss Dweller to just stop the graveyard. Mermail uses Abyss Dweller to make all of its water monsters really strong and trigger Atlantean Dragoons. Really good against Fiendsmiths, Bestials, Mitsurugi, and just about everything else you can throw at it. Now, students, before we get into the last strategy, you remember that exam that I was talking about? I hope you remember that exam. If you want to ace this test and not be a slifer slacker, post down below what are some other strategies that are really good in this particular situation. You're going to need a strategy that's going to be able to stop Yugioh and its multiple engines, Malice and its toxic Nightmare Griffin lock, as well as potential Dimension Shifter, and of course the unknown enigma of Blue Eyes. Now, before YCS Birmingham, I actually played this deck extensively, not only on Master Duel, but also in the TCG. Through my months of playing this deck, I genuinely think that Fire King is one of the best decks in the game. What Fire King does so well is what other strategies can't handle.
destruction. One of the biggest reasons why I decided to play Fire King in Master Duel was actually because of Maxi. Between Maxi, Molchummy Fawilus, and Perulia, players had multiple ways to be able to draw multiple cards or prevent you from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Unfortunately for them, Fire King is incredibly good at being able to play under these circumstances, which relates to the TCG. While we don't have Maxi, over a whopping 75% of decks that are being played in high levels of play of Yu-Gi-Oh! Are playing the Charmy cards. Fire King is excellent at not only being able to play around those Charmy cards, the Pistiles are completely useless against them as well. It's an incredibly strong, low to the ground Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck with tons of potential. And that's what I have for the top 5 meta decks this format class. While it is tier 0, these strategies can really compete. Of course, class, you guys have had your meta lesson, but go ahead and go to your next class, which is one of these videos, to find out more, and I'll catch you on the next one.